In war, every single success achieved on the way to achieving victory is the biggest factor motivating the army. The fact that the army is motivated means that its achievements in the war will increase. This is the approach to victory. When we analyze the developments in the Russian-Ukrainian war, we see that it is the Ukrainian army that is moving towards victory by achieving valuable successes. This is because the Russian army has lost about 200,000 military personnel and tons of ammunition since the beginning of the occupation. This has led to the withdrawal of the Russian army from most of the occupied territories. The Russian army has abandoned about 70% of the occupied territories in Ukraine. Ukrainian army continues to repel Russian invaders from the occupied territories. You can click on the Super Thanks button to support the details of a series of attacks that have brought the Ukrainian army to victory in recent days, and our work carried out with our impartial and accurate journalistic approach in general. If you're ready, let's get started. Soldiers of the Ukrainian Border Reconnaissance Unit had to carry out an unusual attack in the city of Kupiansk in the Kharkiv Oblast the other day. The attack took place while the soldiers on the Border Reconnaissance Unit were observing the border. There was no preparation for this attack, but it was necessary to destroy the bunker of the Russian detachment, which the Ukrainian soldiers encountered during reconnaissance. The soldiers decided to attack the bunker with the ammunition they had with them. The Ukrainian Border Reconnaissance Unit soldiers quietly moved towards the Russian bunker. The bunker was guarded by only a few soldiers and they were chatting with each other. This is because they were inexperienced or drunk soldiers in the Russian army. The soldiers of the reconnaissance unit were carefully monitoring all the developments in and around the bunker and were ready to attack. It was unknown how many Russian soldiers were in the bunker of the Russian occupiers. Therefore, it would not have been right to carry out the attack on the bunker with a ground operation with close combat. The soldiers of the Border Reconnaissance Unit calculated all the possibilities and decided to carry out the attack with the Javelin missile systems they had with them. Since these missiles are portable missiles in the range of 12 to 15 kilograms, they were stored in the Ukrainian soldiers' military vehicle. The equipment in the vehicle was unloaded one by one. Javelin missile systems targeted the bunker of the invaders. The bunker was blown up by the firing of the missile system. This attack in the city of Kupiansk in Kharkiv Oblast was recorded by Ukrainian drone cameras. The footage of the attack was shared by hundreds of users on social media. The footage first shows Ukrainian soldiers conducting reconnaissance before the attack. Then the blowing up of the targeted Russian bunker is shown in the shared recording. The violence of the explosions draws attention after meters of flames rising to the sky. Clouds of smoke cover the area. It is likely that the Russian invaders had explosive ammunition in this bunker. It is not known how many Russian soldiers and how much ammunition was destroyed in the successful attack of the Ukrainian Border Reconnaissance Unit. Another video which millions of people watched on social media took place in the direction of Bakhmut. In this video, Ukrainian Air Force mocks the Russian soldiers in Bakhmut. Bakhmut is one of the regions where the fighting has been the most intense since the beginning of the war. Along with the Russian army, the Wagner Group and Chechen soldiers who support Russia are deployed in this region. Even though Russia is deployed in Bakhmut with all its teams, it cannot occupy Bakhmut. A recent development in Bakhmut, recorded by Ukrainian drone cameras, shows the helplessness of Russian troops in the face of bombs launched by Ukrainian drones. Apparently, the Ukrainian Air Force carried out this attack for fun. This is because the footage begins with a bomb launched far away from the Russian soldiers who are in an open target. When this bomb explodes, the Russian soldiers run quickly to escape from the area. Ukrainian drone cameras record the images in detail. After watching the fleeing Russian soldiers for a while, they are blown up by fired missiles. Russian invaders have suffered a major setback at strategic points. Bakhmut is one of these points because if Russian leader Vladimir Putin can occupy Bakhmut, he will be able to realize his goals of expanding this region to other regions. but he is not succeeding. One of the most important strategic points of the Russian-Ukrainian wars is the areas along the Dnipro River. Because this river passes through both Russian and Ukrainian territories, therefore, the events on the banks of the Dnipro River are constantly heated. In the past few days, the Ukrainian army hit with mortars the temporary accommodation point of the Russian occupiers on the left bank of the Dnipro River. Russian invaders were spotted in the compound on the left bank of the Dnipro River. A villa on a large area attracted the attention of the Russian reconnaissance drones because Russian soldiers were coming and going to this villa. Following the Ukrainian drones, it was determined that this building was being used by the Russian invaders as a temporary accommodation. Ukrainian Air Force prepared for this attack. The villa of the Russian invaders was hit by mortars. The footage of the attack was recorded by drone cameras. In the shared footage, the temporary accommodation of the Russian invaders is hit many times with mortars. It is clearly seen that the Russian occupiers inside the building fled outside. It draws attention to a Russian occupier who was wounded in the attack but tried to leave the area by running. Ukrainian drone cameras focus on this soldier. The soldier is wounded and trying to leave the area, but after a while he gets tired, unable to run anymore. The wounded Russian soldier sits down on the ground. His two friends then take the wounded soldier in their arms and leave the area. The most difficult task these days is to report the losses of the Russian army because these losses do not stop and are constantly increasing. The Russian army also suffered many casualties during the Ukrainian offensive against the invaders of Zaporizhia. The other day, the 44th Artillery Brigade of Ukraine and the 102nd Separate Brigade of the Territorial Defense Forces hit the equipment of the occupying troops one by one. The Russian unit, consisting of about 10 tanks and armored vehicles, was captured by the Ukrainian army as a result of the Ukrainian missile strikes. All vehicles of the unit were destroyed at the end of the footage recorded by the drone cameras. It is seen that huge clouds of smoke rise over about 10 tanks and military vehicles at close distances to each other. The Russian army is approaching a situation where it is unable to continue the occupation due to the increasing shortage of military personnel and ammunition. The Russia-Ukraine war has become a major war with hundreds of clashes within 24 hours. While the Russian army has been depleted one by one in this process, the Ukrainian army has increased its strength with the support of Western and European countries. The determination of Ukrainian leader Zelensky, the support of the Ukrainian people, and the belief of the Ukrainian army ensures success in this war. Russia, on the other hand, does not have this unity. On the contrary, the Russian people and the majority of the military want Putin to stop his invasion of Ukraine because the Russian people do not want to lose their relatives for Putin's personal interests. The army, on the other hand, cannot overcome its religious, linguistic, and racial differences. The turmoil within the Russian army seems to be constantly increasing. Putin is now surrounded on all sides. What are your thoughts? Will Putin give up the invasion of Ukraine? How will the Russian army solve the problem of depleted troops and ammunition? How do you assess the successful offensive of the Ukrainian army? Vladimir Putin, who was on the verge of losing the Ukraine war, faced the danger of civil war. Putin brought the world and his own fortune to the brink of an abyss with his war decision, while the devastating reality of the war united almost the whole world against Russia. The common name and everyone's target was Putin. A new report that shook Russia claimed that Putin's throne is shaking. The invasion of Ukraine created much turmoil in Russia. Putin's decision to invade Ukraine drew the reactions of not only the world, but also his own people whom he tracked to an unknown end. The allegations that there was a leadership war in Russia fell like a bomb on the agenda. After predicting that Russia would be defeated in Ukraine under any circumstance, the race to overthrow President Vladimir Putin began. Russia's military crisis has led to a power crisis. The political war in Russia has already begun. Putin, whose war strategy in Ukraine has been widely criticized, is about to lose his seat. There has been talk backstage that Putin is likely to be sacked if the war in Ukraine continues to go awry. According to information obtained from sources close to his administration, it is said that a future without Putin is being discussed more and more. Although Russia's attack against Ukraine's territorial integrity began as of February 24, it is still a matter of curiosity when this war would end. Invading Russia, which has attacked civilians as well as the Ukrainian army, has not been able to get one step ahead of its target, Moscow, which planned to bring down the Ukrainian capital, Kiev, within 48 hours. On the contrary, had a complete failure by withdrawing from the occupied territories. Internal coups are being planned in Russia, which has moved away from its position. On February 24, Russian President Vladimir Putin has admitted the failure of the Russian army. We can also say that Putin understood that the Russian army should learn from the defeat of the Ukrainians. The fact that the Russian army, which was seriously hit in the Ukraine war, had difficulties and the operations it could carry out on the ground were quite limited, brought the war to a standstill for Russia. On the other hand, the Russian army, using military equipment from the Soviet Union, cannot prevent the attacks of the brave Ukrainian army and continues to retreat. Russian President Putin is officially disappointed in Ukraine, voicing his war failures on Ukrainian soil. The Russian president publicly humiliated the deputy prime minister for not buying more planes. Putin expressed disappointment with the events in Ukraine while scolding his Kremlin colleague. He accused Deputy Prime Minister Denis Manturov of failing to procure military and civilian aircraft to assist Russia's war effort. Angered at the failure to complete contracts for new civil and military aircraft, Putin could hardly contain himself. While Russia continues to be inadequate on the military front, Putin is also looking for new ways to make progress in Ukraine. Needing to make military changes after a difficult few months, Putin dismissed Sergei Surovikin, nicknamed General Armageddon, from his position at the head of Russia's war in Ukraine, just 3 months after he took office, and appointed Valery Gerasimov to replace him. Commanding General Sergei Surovikin, along with 2 other generals, was demoted to Gerasimov's deputy. Officially ordered by Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, the reshuffle came with the express approval of Russian President Vladimir Putin and signaled that he still had confidence in his top military leaders, who have come under widespread criticism over the soldiers' performance in the conflict. Gerasimov is one of Putin's most trusted allies and one of 3 people who helped plan the invasion of Ukraine. On the other hand, after the failures in Ukraine, voices against the government have started to be louder in Russia. President Putin is trying to protect his seat. While contemplating the invasion of Ukraine, internationalists have become more hostile to the Kremlin's policies in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin is on the verge of a palace coup. It's only a matter of time before Putin is overthrown in a coup led by disgruntled hardliners. Putin's place in the presidency began to become even more insecure. Among the rumors, it is claimed that 2 separate groups affiliated to Wagner leader Prigozhin and Defense Minister Shoigu are fighting for the leadership of Russia. There is a rivalry for the new leadership of the country between Wagner's founder, Yevgeny Prigozhin, who is also a close friend of Putin, and Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu. Prigozhin's grouping stands against the grouping that Shoigu is included in. They have already started fighting with each other like it's a feudal war. At the same time, the claims were strengthened that Prigozhin began to position himself not only as a war commander, but also as a public and political figure. Ultranationalists and extreme hardliners who do not oppose the war but do not agree with the way the war is going want to put the bill on Putin and get him out of his seat. It has been understood that all this special military operation or war, which is now called by another name, has no benefit to Russia's reputation or to the economy. For this reason, other groups that could put pressure on Putin joined in the coup plan. The military is absolutely fed up with Putin's personal intervention. It's only a matter of time before we see a palace coup or a Kremlin coup under the leadership of Gerasimov. If they can come up with a plan and moral courage, The Russian army is in a desperate situation as the corruption in their supply system has given them weapons of clearly inferior quality to Western ones. Russian soldiers accused Russian President Vladimir Putin and the military's top command for leaving them high and dry in a frozen trench with supplies or medical care. Russian soldiers also expressed their belief that the actions of the command undermine the combat capability of the army. On the other hand, the town of Soledar, where the hottest clashes are taking place, is an important battlefield, and Russia is fighting for its first significant land gain in months. It looks like a tough victory for the Kremlin. Russia's war to capture Soledar will also come at the expense of the Russians suffering heavy losses and the comprehensive destruction of their claimed territory. The governor of Donetsk, Pavlo Kyrylenko, stated that more than 100 Russian soldiers were killed in the Battle of Soledar in the last 24 hours. Kyrylenko said that Russian forces bombed a dozen towns and villages in the region the other day, while the Russians literally walked over the bodies of their own soldiers and burned everything in their path. Russian forces are using mortars and rockets to bombard Soledar in a relentless assault after military setbacks have turned what the Kremlin had hoped to be a swift victory into a crushing war of attrition that had to end for nearly 12 months while the Russians continue their attacks. Civilians are trying to survive in the middle of this massacre. The fall of Soledar is seen as a reward for a Kremlin that has longed for good news from the battlefield in recent months. After losing the important city of Kherson in December, it also plans to provide a springboard for Russian troops to conquer other parts of the eastern Donetsk province that remain under Ukrainian control, particularly the nearby strategic city of Bakhmut. These Russian dreams are interpreted as the last hopes of a country that is about to lose the war. On the other hand, Ukrainian allies emphasize that they will continue to support Ukraine until victory is achieved against Russia and peace is restored in Europe. French President Emmanuel Macron announced that France will supply Ukraine with light tanks and will continue to support its air defense. It is also stated that the USA will start sending light armored combat vehicles to Ukraine. The willingness of the US to send Bradley-type armored vehicles was confirmed by President Joe Biden. Germany also announced that it will supply Ukraine with air defense systems and armored combat vehicles. It has been confirmed that Germany will supply Ukraine with the Patriot air defense system and Marder-type armored combat vehicles. Now, many weapons that the Ukrainian armed forces bought from their Western allies are on their way. Many of these weapons are heavy weapons, and the Ukrainian armed forces have a great opportunity to defeat Putin. He sees this in the bureaucrats in the Kremlin. It seems that the end of Putin will come from his own circle. There are a lot of developments in the east, here in an attempt to bridge the Ukrainian defense in Bakhmut and make the prospect of counter-offensive hopeless. Wagner forces made a series of very aggressive operations. They entered the most fortified part of the city and simultaneously tried to undercut Ukrainian forces from another side by sending a commando group to force the river and penetrate the city. Unfortunately for Russians, the commando group was completely overwhelmed by Ukrainian snipers and got quickly destroyed. Last time I told you that Russian forces made another significant push to the west in order to reach Mankivka and attack Ukrainian reserves before they launched a counterattack. I also told you that such a high concentration of Wagner units on such a narrow section of the front line allowed Ukrainians to inflict substantial losses on Russians by concentrating their artillery, mortar, and aviation strikes. The freshest reports suggest that this tactic worked well because Russians did not manage to expand their control over the region further, despite the fact that Ukrainian forces retreated from 2 out of 4 checkpoints inside Orakho-Vasilyevka. Russians still have not entered these positions because of the fire from the hills. Right now, the most intense fights are taking place on the second hill north of the settlement. As you can see, the village is located deep between the hills. The change in elevation is more than 60 meters, so control over the settlement is not as important as over the highlands. Russian sources indicate that after several days of intense airstrikes, Ukrainian forces started to push back and conducted several limited counterattacks by leveraging the high ground that they hold. Because Wagner forces are so focused on their flanks, the pressure from the home of the road has been notably alleviated. If over the last several weeks, Ukrainians refrained from using it due to risk and even blew up the bridge, then now they have partially restored the bridge and used the Kremova road once again. Some military analysts are saying that it is possible that Ukrainians have imitated preparation for the counter-offensive along the Sloviansk highway and it may happen somewhere else. Or Wagner forces overstretched themselves and sustained high losses due to their urgent, aggressive response to the point where the need for the counter-offensive disappears. Other military analysts said that judging by the available information on the disposition of Ukrainian troops, the counter-offensive will likely happen at the end of March. When it comes to the city of Bakhmut itself, today it was confirmed that Wagner forces established control over the first shops of the ASM industrial complex, which means that the previous reports of clashes here were correct. The available footage indicates that Russians are controlling the territory of Vostok Marsh. The freshest reports showed that Ukrainians are extensively shelling the industrial areas under Russian control. Wagner forces are complaining that Ukrainians are shelling them non-stop, especially as they begin assaults on underground sections of the ASM complex. Such a tactic destroys Wagner's reinforcements and does not allow them to retreat to the surface of the area that they control. The Institute for the Study of War concluded that Wagner Group fighters are becoming increasingly pinned in urban areas, while Ukrainians are still in the process of reducing Wagner personnel on their own territory. They have successfully destroyed a Russian assault unit that forced the river and tried to put a wedge between the northern and southern groups of Ukrainian forces. 3 days ago, Russians started reporting that a group of special operators forced the river at night and established control over 2 streets, which is quite a lot. Their main goal was to pass the high-rise buildings and use them to provide cover for the reinforcements that would be sent to the area. Unfortunately for Russians, Ukrainian snipers held tight control over this region, which is not that hard considering the number of high-rise buildings around. The same day a video was released by Ukrainian snipers from Bakhmut showing how they hunted down Wagner forces, highly likely exactly in this region. As a result, the latest reports confirmed that Russians lost the bridgehead, but most importantly, they lost an elite group of special operators. Overall, Wagner forces continue pursuing the most aggressive course of action where they are simultaneously betting on either breaching Ukrainian defense in a zone and rapidly taking the city or attacking Ukrainian reserves first, forcing them to pursue positional fights instead of a counter-offensive operation. This once again confirms that the Ukrainian command managed to prevent the encirclement of Bakhmut and impose beneficial for Ukrainians rules of the game, which is urban fighting. The conclusion of Russian military analysts is slowly starting to converge with the one of the Institute for the Study of War. Ukrainian forces are grinding Russian forces' best available infantry to reduce Russian forces' capability to stop any Ukrainian advances.